The howling wind of the Montana winter tore through Sarah Montgomery's threadbare cloak as she clutched her 6-month-old daughter closer to her chest, desperately trying to shield the infant from the merciless cold. It was 1878, and the journey west had taken everything from her husband, her home, and now, it seemed, it might take her precious Emma too. "Please, just hold on a little longer," Sarah whispered, her voice breaking as she felt her daughter's tiny body growing colder despite her efforts. The wagon had broken an axle 3 miles back, and the nearest town was still hours away on foot. The heavy snow had started falling an hour ago, quickly blanketing the rugged landscape in white and dropping the temperature even further. Sarah stumbled through the deepening snow, her feet numb and her vision blurring from exhaustion and tears. Emma had stopped crying 20 minutes ago, and that terrified Sarah more than anything. The baby's small face was pale, her lips taking on a bluish tint that made Sarah's heart constrict with fear. "God, please, send help," she prayed, the words carried away by the wind as soon as they left her lips. She had to keep moving. Stopping meant death for both of them. As she rounded a bend in the trail, Sarah spotted a flicker of movement in the distance. Her heart leaped with a desperate hope as she made out the silhouette of a rider approaching through the swirling snow. "Help!" she called, her voice hoarse and weak. "Please help us." The rider spurred his horse forward, closing the distance between them quickly. As he drew nearer, Sarah could make out a tall man with broad shoulders atop a powerful chestnut stallion. His face was partially obscured by a scarf pulled up against the cold, but his eyes were sharp and alert beneath the brim of his hat. "Madam!" The man's deep voice carried clearly despite the howling wind as he reined his horse to a stop beside her. "What in God's name are you doing out here in this storm?" "My wagon," Sarah began, her teeth chattering violently. "It broke down miles back. My baby. Please, she's so cold. I think she's dying." Without hesitation, the man swung down from his saddle, his boots sinking into the snow. He approached cautiously, as if afraid of frightening her, then gently pulled down his scarf to reveal a face weathered by sun and wind, with a strong jaw shadowed by stubble. "Nathan Xavier," he introduced himself simply, his eyes now fixed on the bundle in her arms. "Let me see the little one." Sarah hesitated only a moment before revealing Emma's face. The baby's eyes were closed, her breathing shallow and irregular. Nathan's expression hardened as he immediately began unbuttoning his heavy leather duster. "She's got the cold sickness," he said, shrugging out of the coat. "We need to warm her up right now." Sarah watched in stunned gratitude as the cowboy removed his coat despite the biting cold, leaving him in just a wool shirt and vest. With practiced hands, he carefully took Emma from Sarah's arms and wrapped the infant snugly in his coat, creating a warm cocoon around her tiny body. "The coat's lined with wool and has my body heat still in it," he explained, cradling Emma with surprising gentleness for such large, calloused hands. "I've got a cabin about a mile from here. We need to get you both out of this cold before it's too late." He whistled to his horse, which obediently moved closer. "Can you ride?" he asked Sarah, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. Sarah nodded, though in truth she had little experience. "If it will save my daughter, I can do anything." Nathan's eyes softened slightly at her words. "That's the spirit, madam. I'll help you up first, then hand you the baby." With efficient movements, he helped Sarah into the saddle, then carefully passed Emma, still bundled in his coat, up to her. Sarah clutched her daughter close, relief washing over her as she felt a slight movement from the bundle. Nathan took the reins and began leading the horse through the snow, walking alongside rather than mounting behind Sarah. The wind cut through his remaining layers, but he showed no sign of discomfort as he pressed forward. "My husband died of fever 3 months ago in Kansas," Sarah found herself saying, needing to fill the silence with something other than the howling wind. We were headed to Oregon. He had a brother there. Nathan glanced up at her, his expression unreadable in the fading light. I'm sorry for your loss, madam. That's a hard journey for anyone, let alone a woman alone with a baby. Sarah, she said. My name is Sarah Montgomery. He nodded once, acknowledgement in his eyes. Well, Mrs. Montgomery, you've made it this far. That says something about your strength. They trudged on in silence for what seemed like hours but was likely only minutes. Nathan occasionally checked on Emma, his large hand gently touching the bundle to ensure the baby was still warm enough. Finally, through the curtain of snow, Sarah could make out the dark outline of a cabin nestled against a stand of pines. Smoke curled from the stone chimney, promising warmth within. Home, Nathan said simply, a hint of relief in his voice as he quickened his pace. The cabin was small but sturdily built, with a covered porch that provided immediate shelter from the falling snow. Nathan helped Sarah dismount, still carefully balancing Emma in her arms, then led them inside while promising to return for his horse momentarily. The warmth of the cabin enveloped Sarah like an embrace. A fire blazed in the stone hearth, casting a golden glow over the simple but tidy interior. A table and chairs sat near a small kitchen area, while a bed was positioned along the far wall. Shelves lined with books, supplies, and a few personal items spoke of a solitary but not entirely Spartan existence. Let's get that little one properly warmed, Nathan said, moving to the fireplace and dragging a rocking chair closer to the flames. Sit here. Sarah sank gratefully into the chair, her frozen limbs beginning to thaw painfully. Nathan unwrapped Emma slightly, checking her color. She's warming up, he said with evident relief. Still too cold, though. Keep her close to the fire, but not too close. I'll make some warm broth. While Nathan busied himself at the small stove, Sarah gently rocked Emma, whispering prayers of thanks as her daughter's color gradually improved. The baby's eyes fluttered open briefly, a sign that gave Sarah hope. She's looking at me, Sarah said, her voice cracking with emotion. Nathan paused in his work, a genuine smile softening his features for the first time. That's good. Real good. He returned to the stove, adding, I'll be back in a moment. Need to see to my horse. When he returned, dusted with snow and bringing a blast of cold air with him, he carried a small bundle of Sarah's possessions he'd strapped to his saddle before leaving. Thought you might want these, he said, setting them by the door. Storm's getting worse. You're lucky I found you when I did. Lucky isn't the word, Sarah replied softly, meeting his eyes. You saved my daughter's life. I can never repay that debt. Nathan looked uncomfortable with her gratitude. Any decent man would have done the same, he mumbled, turning back to the stove. Soon he brought her a steaming mug of broth. Drink this, he instructed. Then we'll see about getting something warm into the little one. Sarah sipped the broth gratefully, feeling life return to her frozen body as the warm liquid spread through her. Nathan kept a respectful distance, watching them with a mixture of concern and something else Sarah couldn't quite identify. You have children of your own, Mr. Xavier? She asked, noticing how naturally he had handled Emma. A shadow passed over his face. Had a son once, he said after a long pause. And a wife. Yellow fever took them both 5 years ago down in Texas. I'm sorry, Sarah said, recognizing the same pain in his eyes that she felt in her heart whenever she thought of her late husband Thomas. Nathan nodded once, accepting her sympathy without comment. What will you do now? He asked instead. Oregon's still a long way off, and winter's just beginning. Sarah looked down at Emma, who was now sleeping peacefully, her color returned to normal. I don't know, she admitted. All our savings were spent on the wagon and supplies. I have nothing left. The nearest town is Fort Benton, about 15 miles from here, Nathan said. But in this weather it might as well be 100. You'll have to stay here until the storm passes. I couldn't impose. It's not an imposition. He cut her off firmly. It's survival. I won't have your deaths on my conscience because I sent you back out into that storm. There was logic in his words that Sarah couldn't argue with. Thank you, she said simply. As evening settled in, Nathan prepared a simple but hearty stew from his stored provisions. He insisted Sarah take his bed, while he would sleep on a bedroll near the fire. After some protest, Sarah relented, exhaustion overcoming her pride. That night, as she lay in the unfamiliar bed with Emma sleeping soundly beside her, Sarah listened to the wind howling outside and silently thanked God for sending Nathan Xavier into their path. Without him, she had no doubt that Emma would have died in the snow, and likely she would have followed soon after. Morning brought silence, the blessed absence of wind signaling the storm had passed. Sarah awoke to find Nathan already up, cooking breakfast over the fire. Emma was awake too, gurgling happily in a makeshift cradle Nathan had fashioned from a wooden crate padded with blankets. She seems to have recovered well, Nathan commented, noticing Sarah's wakefulness. Strong little thing. Like her father, Sarah said softly, rising to check on her daughter. Emma reached up with tiny hands, grabbing at Sarah's hair with renewed vigor. I figured we could head into town today, now that the storm's passed, Nathan said, dishing up plates of beans and bacon. Get you both seen by the doctor, just to be safe. Sarah hesitated. Mr. Xavier, Nathan, he corrected. Nathan, she amended. I have no money for a doctor. He waved away her concern. Doc Jenkins owes me a favor. Besides, it's just a precaution. The little one seems right as rain now. After breakfast, Nathan helped Sarah bundle Emma in warm layers, including a small blanket he admitted to having kept from his son's infancy. The gesture touched Sarah deeply, knowing how precious such mementos must be. The journey to Fort Benton took most of the day, with Nathan insisting they travel slowly for Emma's sake. Sarah rode his horse again, with Emma secured against her chest, while Nathan walked alongside, occasionally scanning their surroundings with the watchfulness of a man accustomed to potential danger. Fort Benton proved to be larger than Sarah had expected, a bustling river port on the Missouri that served as a gateway to the Montana Territory. Log buildings lined the main street, and despite the recent storm, activity had already resumed, with merchants clearing snow from their doorways and freight wagons preparing for departure. Nathan led them directly to the doctor's small office, where Doc Jenkins, a grandfatherly man with spectacles and a kind smile, examined both Sarah and Emma thoroughly. The child is remarkably resilient, he pronounced. No signs of frostbite or lung damage. You got to her in time. He peered at Nathan over his glasses. Good thing you found them when you did, Xavier. Another hour in that cold, and we'd be having a very different conversation. The reality of how close they had come to tragedy hit Sarah anew, and she clutched Emma tighter, tears threatening. As for you, young lady, the doctor continued, addressing Sarah, you've got mild frostbite on 2 toes, but nothing serious. Rest, warmth, and good food should set you both right. Nathan paid the doctor despite Sarah's protests, then led them to the town's modest hotel. You'll stay here tonight, he said firmly. I've spoken to Mrs. Caldwell, the owner. She has a room available. Nathan, I can't accept. Consider it a loan, he interrupted, his expression brooking no argument. When you get settled somewhere, you can pay me back if it eases your pride. Sarah wanted to object further but recognized the futility. Instead, she simply said, "Thank you for everything." Nathan nodded, then surprised her by reaching out to touch Emma's cheek gently. "She's a fighter," he said approvingly. Like her mother. After ensuring they were settled in the hotel room, Nathan promised to return the next day to discuss Sarah's options going forward. Left alone with Emma for the first time since the storm, Sarah finally allowed herself to break down, crying tears of relief and gratitude as she nursed her daughter. True to his word, Nathan appeared the following morning, hat in hand at their door. He had clearly made an effort with his appearance, his hair trimmed and face freshly shaved. "I've been thinking about your situation," he said without preamble as Sarah invited him in. "Fort Benton's growing fast. There's work here for those willing to do it." "What kind of work could I do with a baby?" Sarah asked, practical despite her desperate circumstances. "Mrs. Caldwell mentioned she's looking for help with the hotel. Room and board included," Nathan replied. "And there's a widow, Mrs. Greeley, who runs a small dressmaking shop. She told me she could use an extra pair of hands if you have any skill with a needle." Sarah's spirits lifted slightly. "I was considered quite accomplished at sewing back in Ohio. My mother taught me." Nathan nodded, seeming pleased. "Thought as much, seeing the quality of your daughter's clothes, despite your circumstances." He hesitated, then added, "I also spoke with Reverend Michaels. The church has funds set aside to help those in need, just until you get on your feet." Pride warred with practicality in Sarah's heart. After a moment, practicality won. Emma needed stability and security, and her own pride shouldn't stand in the way of that. "I'll speak with Mrs. Caldwell and Mrs. Greeley today," she decided, "and thank the Reverend for his kindness." Nathan looked relieved. "Good. That's good." He stood awkwardly for a moment, then added, "I'll be heading back to my cabin today. Got livestock to tend to." Sarah felt an unexpected pang at the thought of him leaving. This man, a stranger just 2 days ago, had become her lifeline. "Will you come back to town soon?" she asked hesitantly. Something flickered in his eyes. "I usually come in every couple of weeks for supplies. More often in better weather." "I'd like Emma to see you again," Sarah said, then more boldly added, "And I would too, so we can thank you properly when we're more settled." Nathan's expression softened. "I'd like that as well, Mrs. Montgomery." "Sarah," she corrected gently. "Sarah," he repeated, a small smile touching his lips before he nodded and took his leave. The days that followed brought a flurry of activity as Sarah settled into life in Fort Benton. Mrs. Caldwell proved to be a kind, if somewhat stern, employer, allowing Sarah to work at the hotel's front desk with Emma nearby in her cradle. In the evenings, Sarah took in sewing work from Mrs. Greeley, quickly establishing a reputation for fine stitching and attention to detail. The community welcomed her with typical frontier generosity, bringing small gifts for the baby and offering advice and assistance to the young widow. Sarah wrote to her brother-in-law in Oregon, explaining her circumstances and decision to remain in Montana for the time being. Through it all, thoughts of Nathan Xavier frequently occupied her mind. She found herself watching the trail into town, hoping to glimpse his tall figure on his chestnut horse. 3 weeks after their dramatic meeting, her vigilance was rewarded. Sarah was sweeping the hotel porch when she spotted Nathan riding into town, his familiar silhouette unmistakable even at a distance. Her heart quickened as she watched him stable his horse and speak briefly with several townspeople before turning toward the hotel. He spotted her on the porch and removed his hat as he approached. "Mrs. Montgomery," he greeted her formally, though his eyes were warm. "You're looking well." Indeed, 3 weeks of regular meals and rest had restored Sarah's appearance considerably. Her cheeks had regained their color, and she had managed to mend and improve her limited wardrobe. "As are you, Mr. Xavier," she replied with a smile. "Emma will be delighted to see you. She's just waking from her nap." Nathan's expression brightened at the mention of the baby. "She's doing well, then?" Thriving, Sarah confirmed, leading him inside to where Emma lay in her cradle, cooing and kicking her legs energetically. Nathan crouched beside the cradle, his large frame seeming too big for the dainty hotel furniture. "Hello there, little fighter," he said softly to Emma, who immediately fixed her bright eyes on him and gave a toothless grin. "She remembers you," Sarah said, surprised. Nathan glanced up, something vulnerable in his expression. "You think so?" "I do. She doesn't smile at just anyone like that." A comfortable silence fell between them as they both watched Emma's antics. Finally, Nathan cleared his throat. "I brought something. For the little one." He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small wooden horse, beautifully carved and sanded smooth. "Made it myself. Figured she might like something to hold on to when she gets a bit older." Sarah accepted the gift, touched by the thoughtfulness and skill evident in the carving. "It's beautiful, Nathan. Thank you." Their fingers brushed as she took the toy, and Sarah felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire burning in the hotel's hearth. For a brief moment, their eyes met, and Sarah saw in Nathan's gaze a reflection of her own loneliness and hope. The moment was broken by Mrs. Caldwell calling for Sarah's assistance with a new guest. Nathan took his leave, promising to visit again before he returned to his cabin. That evening, he appeared at the hotel just as Sarah was finishing her duties. "Thought you might like to join me for supper at the cafe," he said, the invitation clearly rehearsed. To catch up properly. Sarah accepted eagerly, arranging for Mrs. Caldwell to watch Emma for an hour. The simple meal at the town's only cafe became the first of many such encounters over the following months. As winter gave way to spring, Nathan's visits to town increased in frequency. He always brought small gifts, a carved toy for Emma, wildflowers for Sarah, or books borrowed from his own collection. Each visit revealed more of the man beneath the stoic exterior. His dry humor, his intelligence fostered by years of reading during lonely winters, his gentle way with Emma, who adored him. Sarah, too, blossomed in his company. The grief that had shadowed her since Thomas's death began to ease, making room for new feelings that both frightened and exhilarated her. By early summer, Emma was crawling energetically and beginning to pull herself up on furniture. Sarah had saved enough from her work to rent a small cottage on the edge of town, giving them more independence while still allowing her to continue her employment at both the hotel and the dressmaking shop. Nathan helped her move into the cottage, spending several days repairing the roof and building sturdy furniture that would last for years. Their easy companionship had grown into something deeper, though neither had put words to their feelings. On a warm June evening, with Emma finally asleep after an exciting day of exploration, Sarah and Nathan sat on the cottage's small porch, watching fireflies rise from the tall grass. "I've been thinking," Nathan said after a comfortable silence, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant, "about the future." Sarah's heart quickened. "Oh, my cabin's too small for more than one person. Always known that." He looked at his hands, strong and calloused from years of hard work. "Been thinking about building something bigger, something more like a proper home." "That sounds like a good plan," Sarah said carefully, not wanting to presume his meaning. Nathan took a deep breath, finally turning to meet her eyes directly. "Thing is, a home needs a family to make it worth building, and I found myself thinking about family again. Something I never thought I'd do after losing mine." Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes as understanding dawned. "Nathan, I know it hasn't been that long since you lost your husband," he continued hurriedly, "and I'd never want to rush you or make you feel obligated because of what happened with Emma. But I care for you, Sarah, for both of you, more than I thought possible." Sarah reached out, taking his weathered hand in hers. "When Thomas died, I thought that part of my life was over, that I'd never feel that way again." She squeezed his hand gently. I was wrong. Hope dawned in Nathan's eyes. Does that mean... It means I care for you too, Sarah said softly. And Emma adores you. You gave her life back to her that day in the snow. Perhaps you gave mine back too. Nathan's face transformed with a smile that took years off his appearance. Carefully, as if she might break, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers in a tender kiss that promised a lifetime of protection and devotion. When they parted, both somewhat breathless, Nathan reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple gold band. It was my mother's, he explained. I've been carrying it for weeks, waiting for the right moment. Sarah's heart overflowed as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It's perfect, she whispered. They were married 2 weeks later in Fort Benton's small church, with Emma, now nearly a year old, gurgling happily in Mrs. Caldwell's arms during the ceremony. The entire town turned out to celebrate the union, seeing in it a perfect frontier love story: the cowboy, the widow, and the baby saved from the cruel Montana winter. That summer, Nathan built their new home on his land, a comfortable 4-room house with large windows to capture the spectacular Montana views. Sarah filled it with touches that made it truly theirs. Curtains she sewed herself, furniture Nathan crafted, and always, prominently displayed on the mantel, the leather coat that had saved Emma's life, preserved as a reminder of how their family began. As autumn painted the landscape in brilliant gold and crimson, Sarah stood on their porch, watching Nathan teach Emma to pet a gentle old mare. The little girl's delighted laughter carried on the breeze, and Sarah's hand rested protectively over her stomach, where new life had just begun to grow. When Nathan looked up and caught her eye, his smile reflected all the love and hope that had grown from that desperate moment in the snow. Sarah smiled back, knowing that sometimes the cruelest storms can lead to the most beautiful beginnings. 5 years later, their home bustled with the energy of 3 children: Emma, now a spirited 6-year-old with her mother's determination, and the Xavier twins, Thomas and Nicole, 3 years old and inseparable. The ranch had prospered under Nathan's careful management, and Sarah's dressmaking skills had evolved into a small but successful business serving clients throughout the territory. On cold winter nights, the children would beg for the story of how their family came to be the tale of a desperate mother, a dying baby, and the cowboy who gave his coat in a blizzard. Nathan and Sarah would exchange smiles over their children's heads, marveling at how their greatest happiness had been born from their darkest moments. And always, hanging near the door ready for winter journeys, was a new leather coat for Nathan, made by Sarah's hands, a reminder that sometimes the greatest acts of love are also the simplest, and that warmth can be found even in the coldest of storms.